2023, an AI company posted a job with a salary of $335,000 a year for writing instructions to a chatbot. No coding degree required. The listing itself admitted the entire field was only 2 years old, and that role was, and I quote here, a bit hard to hire for. Now, that job title was prompt engineering, and if you believe the headlines of the last 2 years, that title is now dead, killed by something called context engineering, which, if you believe this year's headline, is now being replaced by another thing called harness engineering. So 3 terms in 3 years. How does this happen, and what's actually going on here? Well, the reality is that all 3 of these terms aren't actually competing. And by the end of this video, you'll be able to explain the actual relationship between each one of them in a singular sentence, probably better than most people who actually use these tools. I've seen these terms float around everywhere. I'm talking LinkedIn, job listings, meeting rooms, etc. And the fastest way to understand them isn't necessarily a definition, it's actually the dates. Each one of these terms was born at a very specific moment, 2020, 2025, and now 2026. Every single time, it was born for the same reason. As AI got better, our jobs as humans around it got bigger. So I'm gonna walk you through the entire timeline, and there's 3 distinct eras. In era 1, 2020, a lab called OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT, this was about 2 years before the product that we're all familiar with came out, released a model called GPT-3. And for the first time, an AI could genuinely write convincing text about almost anything. It had one problem though. Its attention span was tiny. GPT-3 could only consider about 2,000 tokens at the time. And for context, a token is simply the chunk AI can read text in, right? So you could consider a token about 3/4 of a word. So 2,000 tokens is about 1,500 word or about 3 pages. That was the AI's entire world. Whatever fit in those 3 pages, that was everything it knew about you and your problems. So the only thing that you controlled was the words you typed. That's what people call the prompt. And people discovered that the exact words mattered an incredible amount. If you phrase a certain request one way, you get garbage, and then you phrase it another way, and you get an amazing result. The craft of finding those magic words needed a name. And the name that stuck, prompt engineering, is actually credited to a researcher named Gwern Branwen. I'll put his actual research paper. It's pretty interesting to go read about GPT-3, and it's also interesting to see how they were thinking about AI in 2020. Then, as you know, ChatGPT launched in late 2022, and everybody started prompting, and this sort of niche craft almost became like a gold rush. In January of 2023, Andre Karpathy, one of the co-founders of OpenAI, who then ran AI at Tesla, who, by the way, now works at Anthropic, the other AI behemoth behind Claude, and he said this: the hottest new programming language is English. Weeks later, that $300,000 job I was talking about actually went up. So I would consider that the peak. Let's sort of lock in on era 1, which is we have this AI in a box that you can type into, and it can only really see 3 pages. And the only lever that you actually have is what you say. That's why prompt engineering got so popular. Now, 2 things changed, and they changed really fast. First was the 3-page attention span exploded. I mean, by May of 2023, Claude could read 100,000 tokens at once. By February, Google's Gemini could do 1 million. That's not 3 pages anymore. 1 million tokens, that's an entire novel in one go. Second thing that changed is AI stopped being just a chat box that you can interact with. Companies started wiring it into actual products. And a real product doesn't just send your AI questions. It needs documents, it needs your chat history, customer account details, results from databases, etc. All of it needs to go into a singular window every single time. Now, that window is what we now call the context window. And here's what people were learning along the way. Is when AI gave bad answers inside of a real product, the problem was rarely the phrasing the request. It was intelligent enough to understand. The issue was that the information that got loaded into the window, prompting stopped being the bottleneck. It became the context window. That realization actually got a name attached to it when in June of 2025, the CEO of Shopify, Toby, he posted online something saying that he prefers the term context engineering over prompt engineering because the real skill that they were dealing with was handling what was in the context window. The real skill is giving your agent everything it needs so that the task is actually solvable. Now, a week later, Karpathy, again, he publicly sort of +1'd it, right? He called context engineering the delicate art and science of filling the context window, deciding every single step exactly what deserves to be in the AI's limited attention. And one of the analogies that really stuck came from the same conversation, which is you can think of the AI model as a processor, and the context window is its working memory, and you as essentially the operating system deciding what gets loaded into that memory. You load the right thing and it'll work. If you load garbage, you'll get garbage out. Doesn't matter how smart the processor is. Now, there's one thing to know, which is the part that these headlines talking about prompt engineering died really skip. And if you actually look at what Karpathy said, he didn't say prompting was over. He said prompts are what you write in a day-to-day chat, but context engineering is what serious AI products do around them. That doesn't mean prompting isn't important anymore. It means that as our goals and capabilities with these tools grows, so does our responsibility. Your prompt didn't die. It just became one ingredient inside of a bigger recipe, what I would call the second era. We're still here in 2025. AI now sees whatever gets assembled into a giant window. The lever isn't just what you say, it's what the AI also sees. And here's where we get on to era 3, which is the harness, the new buzzword. And by the way, people will absolutely just throw these words around to just sound smart. By late 2025, AI wasn't just answering questions inside products, it was doing processes on its own. That's what you call an agent, not an AI that just replies to you, but can take actions on your behalf. I'm talking opening files, running softwares, writing and testing code, etc. And if you want to try an agent in the real world, this is probably one of my favorite examples examples, when I signed up for Twilio a few months back, I had an entire conversation over email with somebody who I thought was human. It wasn't until about 5 or 6 questions deep that I realized this was AI, and they eventually were able to escalate me to a person. However, it was an easy example of even me as somebody who runs an AI agency, who have business partner Mark called Prompt Advisors, where we've been delivering these custom AI solutions to companies for the last few years, as well as run one of the biggest AI community on School, with over 1,300 members now, which by the way, links to both will be in the description. It just went to show me that these products are real. Even somebody who works in this business, I have no issues interacting with AI agents on a day-to-day basis. So let's get back to harnesses. February 5th, 2026. Mitchell Hashimoto, who is actually the co-founder of HashiCorp, which is a huge software company that IBM bought for like $6 billion a while back. He published a post about exactly this, and his post said this. Essentially, his practice is the following. Every time an agent makes a mistake, you don't just fix it in chat. You change the agent's environment so that the mistake can never happen again. That could be adding a standing instruction file the agent can read every session. It could be giving it a script to check its own work, and he'd grown to call this process harness engineering. And now just 6 days later, February 11th, OpenAI actually published a post using the same term, and the numbers they spoke about is part of the reason why this word is everywhere now. They said that the OpenAI team built an internal product over the last 5 months to run 1 million lines of code. The number of lines a human typed by hand was 0. There was 3 engineers, around 1,500 batches of changes, and their job the entire time wasn't writing code. It was designing the environment that the agents worked inside, the rules they would read, the checks their work had to pass, the feedback loops that caught mistakes automatically, and the post philosophy fits in 4 words, which was humans steer and agents execute. So let's go back to our question, which is what exactly is a harness? The way I interpret it, the word harness is the gear that channels a horse's strength. It doesn't make the horse necessarily stronger. It makes it go somewhere useful. So in this case, the harness is everything wrapped around the AI model. That's the tools it's allowed to use, the instructions it reads, the tests that it creates that it must pass, the tripwires that stop it from doing things it shouldn't be doing it. And if you'd rather visualize it, the model would be sort of the brain. That would be your ChatGPT, your Claude, etc. And the harness will be your body, which is what allows you to move around, allows you to interact with the real world. Case in point, for the Twilio example I gave earlier, while the LLM or model might have a simple prompt saying something along the lines of answer this question from the user, the harness will be the system that feeds it with when an email comes in. It'd be the automation that searches the database to identify the email address to find out if this is an existing user. It'd be the memory system that allows the agent to be able to handle multiple turns in an email chain. It could also be a part of it is the tool that allows the model to escalate this to a human in whatever backend ticketing system they have. LangChain, the company behind one of the most popular toolkit developers used to build AI apps, published what I believe to be one of the cleanest one-liners breakdown of all this, which is if you're not the model, you're the harness. And if you think the harness sounds more like a minor detail, like the next to the model, almost like the accessories on the engine, here's a stat that should hopefully shed some light on this. There was a public benchmark called Terminal Bench, right, which is basically just a test for coding agents. And LangChain, they reported taking the same exact AI model and moving it from around 30th place into the top 5 without touching the model. The only thing they changed was the harness. Same brain, different harness, completely different results. And I can tell you from our own client work, this really does match kind of what we're seeing. The teams that are getting really good results from AI and the teams getting garbage are usually using the same models. People default to the latest model. The advantage isn't in the LLM you're using, it's in the harness you build around it. That sort of ties up era 3, which is now that AI is acting on its own, the lever is the entire environment it works inside. Let's take a step back and look at what actually happened across these 3 eras. Because it's not one skill replacing another. The prompt, as we just spoke about, sits inside of the context. And your instructions is one of those ingredients in that window. The context itself sits inside the harness. Deciding what the agent sees is one of the jobs of the environment as well. Going back to LangChain for a second, their own article says the harness is largely the delivery system for a good context. They master it's like an instruction instead of a briefing, instead of a workspace. And we really have one job, which is controlling what the AI sees and can do. It's just 3 different zoom levels. And every time we zoomed out, it's because AI got more independent. We went from chatbot to product to now to agent. 2020, 2025, now 2026. Hopefully, this should tell you exactly how seriously to take these prompt engineering is dead claims. Over a year before context engineering was even coined, the headlines were burying skills that just got wrapped in bigger ones. When harness engineering is dead shows up, and it will, you'll know the drill. Something didn't die, we just zoomed out again. If you take anything away from this video, is that these terms aren't necessarily competing. Prompts are instructions, context is memory, and the harness is the management of tools, memory, and other elements required for a model to perform a specific task. Each one wraps around the last. If you actually want to feel the difference, you don't need to be an engineer. Next time you use ChatGPT or Claude, notice the settings where you can save instructions about who you are and how you like answers. The moment you write those, you stop just prompting. You're maintaining a tiny environment for your AI to work inside of every single session. That's a harness. Small one, but very much the same idea that's running OpenAI's millions of code. The word doing the heaviest lifting in this harness story is the word agents, right? Which is essentially AI that acts instead of just answering. If that concept is still fuzzy, subscribe because that's what the next video is going to be about. I'll see you in that one.